January 31st, 2026. The new year has already begun to quiet down. The excitement of resolutions has softened. The promises we made to ourselves may already feel heavy. For many people, this is the moment when motivation fades and self-judgment quietly takes its place. We start wondering why we couldn't keep up, why we already feel behind, why we didn't change fast enough. But Buddhism offers a very different understanding of beginnings. A new beginning does not require force. It does not require perfection, and it does not require becoming someone else. In Buddhist wisdom, the mind can begin again at any moment, not when conditions are ideal, but exactly as they are, especially when we feel tired, uncertain, or disappointed. So what if 2026 doesn't need a better version of you? What if it simply needs a kinder relationship with yourself? Today, instead of adding more pressure, we'll explore a quieter foundation for the year ahead. Unconditional self-compassion. Not as an escape, but as a way to meet life with steadiness, honesty, and peace. January 31st is a powerful moment, even though it doesn't look dramatic. The expectations of the new year have already passed. The pressure to reinvent yourself has softened, and burnout hasn't fully arrived yet. This brief window, after striving before exhaustion, is where real change becomes possible. Most resolutions fail not because we lack discipline, but because they are built on a fragile foundation. They quietly assume that you are only worthy when you perform well, improve quickly, or stay consistent without struggle. When that standard slips, the mind turns against itself. Buddhism teaches something radically different. Suffering grows when we tie our worth to outcomes. When success determines whether we feel deserving of care, rest, or patience, life becomes a constant test we are afraid to fail. Even growth begins to feel unsafe. That's why Buddhism does not begin with achievement. It begins with relationship. Before asking what you will change this year, it asks how you will treat yourself while changing, or while not changing at all. Inner stability comes before outer transformation. Without it, even success feels anxious and temporary. Unconditional self-compassion does not mean giving up on growth. It means no longer using self-punishment as motivation. When the mind feels safe, it becomes flexible. When it feels accepted, it becomes resilient. This year does not need to be controlled. It needs to be supported. Before changing your life, Buddhism asks you to change how you relate to yourself. And from that shift, everything else begins to move more gently and more honestly. When people hear the phrase self-compassion, many misunderstand it. They imagine indulgence, lower standards, avoiding responsibility, or pretending that everything is fine when it isn't. But unconditional self-compassion is none of these. In Buddhist wisdom, compassion is not softness without clarity. It is honesty held with kindness. It means seeing things exactly as they are. Your struggles, your mistakes, your limitations, without adding punishment on top of pain. Unconditional compassion means you do not need to earn care by performing well. You do not need to prove your worth through productivity, discipline, or success. You are allowed to meet yourself with warmth simply because you are human. In Buddhism, compassion, karuna, is the response to suffering. And that response does not change when the suffering is your own. When difficulty arises, the practice is not to push harder, but to stay present without turning against yourself. There is a deep difference between conditional self-worth and unconditional compassion. Conditional worth says, I will be kind to myself when I do better. Unconditional compassion says, I will stay with myself even when things fall apart. This doesn't mean giving up on growth. It means growth no longer comes from fear. When compassion is present, change happens without violence. Unconditional compassion means you don't abandon yourself when life gets difficult. And that simple shift creates a foundation strong enough to carry you through whatever this year brings. For many people, the inner critic becomes loud right around this time of year, after the holidays, after the promises, after the plans that didn't quite hold. A voice appears that says you should have done more, been better, stayed stronger. It claims to be helping, motivating, pushing you forward. But Buddhism sees this clearly. Self-judgment often disguises itself as discipline, but its root is fear. Fear of failing, fear of falling behind, fear of not being enough. And fear never creates lasting change. It only creates tension. When we speak harshly to ourselves, the nervous system doesn't become motivated. It becomes defensive. Creativity shrinks. Energy contracts. We either freeze or force ourselves forward until we burn out again. The Buddha taught that aversion deepens suffering, and aversion toward the self is still aversion. You cannot heal what you are attacking. You cannot grow in an environment of constant threat. This is why self-criticism fails, even when it feels familiar. It may create short bursts of effort, but it erodes trust. Over time, the mind learns that trying means being punished, and eventually, it stops trying altogether. Unconditional self-compassion interrupts this cycle, not by silencing the critic aggressively, but by recognizing it for what it is, a frightened attempt to stay safe. The voice that shames you is not wisdom. It is fear asking for care. And when that fear is met with compassion instead of force, something finally begins to soften. Self-compassion is not something you think about later once the pain has passed. It is something you practice inside the moment itself, right when discomfort arises. In Buddhism, compassion is trained through awareness, not by fixing what hurts, but by meeting it without adding judgment. The first step is mindfulness. When something difficult appears, an emotion, a mistake, a sense of inadequacy, notice what is happening without labeling it as good or bad. You might silently acknowledge, this hurts, or this is uncomfortable. Nothing more is needed. Awareness alone begins to soften resistance. Pain grows sharper when we argue with it. It settles when it is seen. The second practice is remembering common humanity. When you struggle, the mind often whispers that you are alone in this, that others are doing better, coping better, being better. Buddhism gently dissolves this illusion. Suffering is not personal failure. It is part of being human. Everyone who lives will struggle. Everyone who cares will hurt. You can quietly remind yourself, others feel this too. Not to minimize your pain, but to normalize it. This simple recognition loosens isolation. It replaces shame with belonging. The third practice is self-kindness. Ask yourself, if a dear friend came to me feeling this way, how would I respond? You likely wouldn't scold them. You wouldn't demand they improve immediately. You would listen. You would soften your tone. You might offer reassurance, or simply stay close. Self-kindness means offering that same tone inward. It might be placing a hand on your chest. It might be speaking gently to yourself. It might be choosing rest instead of force. In Buddhism, this is not positive thinking. It is training the heart to remain open under pressure. Compassion does not erase pain, but it changes how pain is held. Instead of being carried alone and clenched tightly, it is held with warmth and steadiness. And with practice, this way of meeting difficulty becomes natural. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop turning against yourself when it doesn't. Self-compassion is not a momentary insight. It is a way of relating to yourself that unfolds over time. As 2026 continues, the question is not whether life will challenge you, but how you will meet those challenges when they arrive. Living compassionately does not require dramatic change. It grows through simple, repeatable rituals woven into ordinary days. A pause before reacting, one conscious breath when tension appears, a shift in inner language from "what's wrong with me?" to "this is hard and I'm still worthy of care." These moments may seem small, but in Buddhism, repetition is how the mind is trained. Each act of kindness becomes a reference point the nervous system remembers. Over time, compassion becomes less something you try to do and more something you return to. This matters most during setbacks. Plans will change, energy will fluctuate. Some days will not go as you hoped. Without compassion, these moments quickly turn into self-blame. But with compassion, impermanence becomes easier to meet. You stop interpreting difficulty as personal failure and begin to see it as part of the natural rhythm of living. Buddhism teaches that stability does not come from controlling outcomes. It comes from maintaining a steady relationship with yourself regardless of what happens. When compassion is present, you remain connected to your worth even when circumstances are uncertain. You can still learn, you can still adjust, but you no longer abandon yourself in the process. As 2026 unfolds, let compassion be the ground you stand on, not as a reward for doing well, but as the place you return to when things don't go as planned. Because when compassion becomes your ground, even uncertainty feels survivable. As you move forward into 2026, remember this: you are not behind. There is nothing you need to fix before kindness begins. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that each moment is a beginning, not a dramatic restart, but a quiet opportunity to relate differently, to soften where you once pushed, to stay present where you once judged. This year does not need to be built on pressure or self-improvement. It can unfold from acceptance, from patience, from a willingness to stop turning against yourself when life becomes difficult. If this reflection resonated with you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to continue exploring Buddhist wisdom for living with clarity and compassion, consider subscribing to the channel. May 2026 not be the year you become someone else, but the year you finally stop turning against yourself.